It was exactly 4 in the morning when I pulled into the parking lot. The asphalt was pitch black, empty except for my old sedan and the security guard's pickup truck parked near the loading dock. My hands were shaking slightly as I swiped my access badge at the front entrance of Vance Consulting. The reader beeped, its green light flashing, and the heavy glass door clicked open with a dull thud. The building was dark and silent, which was exactly what I needed at this hour. I had a thick manila folder tucked firmly under my arm, and inside it was the documentation that was about to blow the company apart from the inside out. I took the elevator to the executive floor, the motion sensors triggering the overhead fluorescent lights as I walked down the carpeted hallway. Miles Vance's corner office was quiet, filled with expensive leather furniture and polished glass. I did not hesitate. I walked straight to his desk and placed the manila folder right in the center of his mahogany desk pad, where he could not miss it. Then, I turned around and walked out. I left no note and no explanation. He would understand soon enough. My name is Julian Barlow, and up until yesterday, I was proud to be the senior financial analyst at Vance Consulting. I had given 15 years of my life to this firm. 15 years of working late nights, sacrificing my weekends, and making sure that every single financial report, audit prep, and budget projection was absolutely flawless. I had trained 6 junior analysts who had since moved on to higher positions. I had personally caught financial discrepancies that saved the company from 2 major audit penalties. I knew the financial bones of Vance Consulting better than anyone else. Yet, as I recently discovered, none of that dedication mattered as much as having the right last name. Everything began unraveling 3 days ago on a Tuesday. My son Owen, who was 7 years old at the time, had forgotten his lunch on the kitchen counter. I ran home during my afternoon break to grab it and drop it off at his school. When I returned to the office around 2 in the afternoon, the atmosphere was different. People were whispering in small clusters, their voices hushed, and they quickly dispersed when they saw me walking down the corridor. My colleague Nora, who worked in accounts payable and had been with the company for 8 years, caught my eye. She looked nervous. She nodded toward the small conference room at the end of the hall and mouthed the words, 5 minutes. I walked to my desk, pretended to check my emails, and then casually slipped into the small conference room. Nora was already there, along with Brenda from Human Resources and Peggy from Operations. Nora closed the door and turned to me. She explained that there had been a system glitch in the payroll system that morning. The spreadsheet, containing the entire company payroll, had been accidentally uploaded to the shared network drive instead of the secure server. It was only online for 15 minutes before the information technology department realized the mistake and took it down. But that was long enough. Nora had taken a screenshot of the spreadsheet before it was deleted. She showed me her phone screen. I scrolled down to my own name, Julian Barlow, Senior Financial Analyst, $98,000. It was a decent salary, but I had been asking for a raise for the past 2 years, only to be repeatedly told that the company budget was too tight. Then Nora pointed to the line below mine, Jared Vance, Financial Analyst, $130,000. I read it 3 times to make sure my eyes were not playing tricks on me. Jared Vance was the owner's nephew. He was 24 years old and had graduated from college just 6 months ago. He had 0 professional experience when he started, and I had spent the last 6 months training him, teaching him how to use our systems, and correcting his financial models. Yet, he was making 32% more than me. There is more, Peggy said quietly, pointing further down the sheet. Simon Gable, our operations analyst who had been with the firm for 12 years, was earning $92,000. Right under him was Troy Vance, the owner's other nephew, who had started 4 months ago as an operations coordinator with no experience. Troy was earning $120,000. 2 young nephews, both with the same last name as the owner, were earning significantly more than the professionals who had spent over a decade building the company. I sat down in one of the office chairs, my mind spinning. I thought about all the sacrifices I had made. I had missed my son's kindergarten graduation because of an emergency budget meeting. I had worked through the evening of my father's funeral service because we had a critical audit. My wife, Sarah, had basically run our household alone during the busy quarters. For 15 years, Miles Vance had told me that I was a cornerstone of the company, a highly valued asset. It was all a lie. The budget was not tight. It was just reserved for family members who did not even know the basic principles of finance. I looked at Nora and the others. I told them I was going to talk to Miles. Nora warned me to be careful, reminding me how defensive Miles got about his family, but my mind was made up. I requested a meeting for the next morning. The next morning at 9, I walked into Miles Vance's office. He was 58 years old, sporting a deep tan from his frequent golf trips and wearing a tailored suit that probably cost $3,000. He looked up from his phone as I entered. He did not offer me a seat, but I sat down anyway in one of the leather armchairs facing his massive desk. I told him directly that I wanted to discuss my compensation. Miles sighed and leaned back in his ergonomic chair, which itself probably cost $4,000. He told me that my annual performance review was not scheduled until November and that we should wait until then. I replied that we could not wait because I had become aware of a major pay disparity that needed to be resolved immediately. Miles's expression hardened. He set his phone down on the desk and asked which details had caught my attention. I told him that I knew Jared Vance was earning $130,000 as a junior analyst, while I was earning $98,000 as the senior analyst training him. I pointed out that I had 15 years of experience and professional certifications that Jared did not possess. Miles stared at me in silence for a moment, then said that discussing salary information was against company policy. I told him that he was incorrect. Under the National Labor Relations Act, employees have a clear legal right to discuss their compensation, and it is illegal for an employer to prohibit or punish them for doing so. Miles's jaw tightened, and he said that regardless of the law, it was highly unprofessional to bring this up. I responded that what was truly unprofessional was paying an inexperienced nephew 32% more than the senior analyst who had to redo all of his work. Miles stood up and walked to the window, claiming that Jared's compensation was based on market analysis and his future potential value to the company. I countered that I had conducted my own market research. The average salary for a senior financial analyst with my credentials in this city was between $115,000 and $135,000. I was being paid well below the market rate, while the company funded his nephew's lavish salaries. I told Miles that I wanted my salary adjusted to $135,000, which was the fair market rate for my experience, and I wanted this adjustment made retroactive for the past 3 years, during which my requests for a raise had been repeatedly denied. Miles laughed, a dry and dismissive sound. He told me that my demands were completely unrealistic and that Vance Consulting did not operate that way. I asked him how the company did operate, because it seemed to me that performance was irrelevant compared to sharing his last name. I reminded him of the time I caught a $420,000 discrepancy that would have ruined a major client relationship. I reminded him of the financial modeling system I built that saved our department 38 hours of manual labor every single month. Miles placed his hands flat on his desk and leaned forward. He said that my 15 years of service did not entitle me to dictate terms, and that Jared's education and fresh perspective brought value that I did not appreciate. I pointed out that Jared's fresh perspective had resulted in 3 failed budget projections in his first month, all of which I had to completely rewrite. I told him that Jared had called me the previous week because he did not know how to construct a standard profit and loss statement. I was doing my own job and his job while receiving a fraction of his pay. I asked him if my training services were also part of my $98,000 salary, or if I was supposed to be doing that for free as well. Miles paced behind his desk, trying to regain control of the room. Finally, he turned to me and offered a 6% raise, which would bring my salary to $103,880 effective next quarter. He told me that this was the absolute maximum the budget could accommodate. I told him that his offer was an insult, especially since he had found room in the budget for Jared and Troy just a few months prior. Miles looked me in the eye, his voice cold and final. He told me that Jared's situation was different, and that this 6% raise was his final offer. I could either take it or leave it. Hearing those words, take it or leave it, made something click inside my mind. I realized that my loyalty had been completely wasted on this man and this company. I got up from my chair and walked out of his office without saying another word. The anger stayed with me all day as I went through the motions of my work, reviewing spreadsheets and answering routine inquiries. I felt like a stranger in my own life, realizing that 15 years of hard work had been reduced to a dismissive ultimatum. I knew that I could not just accept the insult and carry on as if nothing had happened. I had to make a choice, and I chose to fight back. When I returned home that evening, Sarah could tell immediately that something was wrong. After we put Owen to bed, I sat down with her at the kitchen table and explained everything. I told her about the payroll spreadsheet, my meeting with Miles, and his final ultimatum. Sarah was furious. She was washing a glass in the sink, and she stopped, holding it under the running water as I spoke. The anger on her face was not just for me. It was for the weekends she had spent taking Owen to the park alone, the birthdays I had celebrated with a quick phone call from a conference room, and the quiet sacrifices we had both made over 15 years. She dried her hands on a kitchen towel, sat down opposite me, and placed her hand over mine. Her voice was calm but resolute. She told me that I was letting emotions cloud my judgment. She reminded me that I was a financial analyst, and that my greatest strength was my ability to analyze data, find discrepancies, and build an airtight case. She told me to go to my computer and document everything. That advice was exactly what I needed. I opened my laptop and worked through the entire night. Sarah brought me cups of black coffee at midnight and a sandwich at 2 in the morning, but I barely looked up from my screen. She checked on me again at 3 in the morning, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder and whispering that she was proud of me. Her presence gave me the strength to push through the exhaustion, knowing that I was not just fighting for my own career, but for our family's future. The house was completely quiet, save for the soft clicking of my keyboard. I did not just focus on my own salary gap anymore. I began examining the entire compensation structure of the company. Over the years, I had gained access to various financial records, and I knew how to find public salary data for comparison. I built detailed spreadsheets analyzing compensation across departments, comparing years of service, qualifications, and actual performance. As the data came together, a clear and disturbing pattern emerged. The pay disparities were not limited to the Vance family. On average, female employees at Vance Consulting were paid 25% less than male employees in identical roles. Furthermore, older employees with significant experience were consistently underpaid compared to younger, less qualified hires. It was a systematic effort to keep payroll costs low for the core staff, while the owner used the savings to fund his own family's lifestyle. I checked the figures twice, ensuring my formulas were correct and that there was no room for error. I also found that in the marketing department, Julia Perez, who had been with the company for 8 years and had successfully launched our last 4 major campaigns, was making $85,000, while a junior hire with no background was earning much more. I discovered that during the previous fiscal year, when Miles had frozen all employee raises, claiming the budget was flat, the company had actually posted its highest profits in history. Miles had quietly awarded himself a bonus of $550,000 that same quarter. He had then hired Jared and Troy at inflated salaries, while telling the rest of us that we needed to make sacrifices for the good of the firm. I documented every single transaction, compiling charts, graphs, and performance metrics. I compared my stellar performance reviews with Jared's error-ridden reports, which I had kept copies of from my review sessions. By 4 in the morning, I had compiled a 43-page report detailing the systemic compensation issues at Vance Consulting. I did not just list salaries, I structured the document as a formal legal analysis. I specifically cited the Equal Pay Act of 1963, Section 206, subsection D of Title 29 of the United States Code, showing how the company was in direct violation of federal law by paying unequal wages for equal work. I also included references to relevant state labor codes that protected employees from discrimination and retaliation. It was the most comprehensive and devastating financial analysis of my career. I printed the report, placed it in a clean manila folder, and drove back to the office in the dark. That brought me to the moment I placed the folder on Miles's desk at 4 in the morning. After leaving the building, I went home, showered, helped Owen get ready for school, and returned to work at my usual time. At 8:30, Nora walked past my desk and whispered that Miles had just called an emergency management meeting. At 9, my computer beeped with an email from the owner's assistant requesting my immediate presence in the main conference room. When I walked into the conference room, it was packed with managers, department heads, and HR staff. Miles was sitting at the head of the table, looking incredibly stressed. Sitting next to him was a woman I had never seen before, a serious attorney named Helena York from York and Partners. My manila folder lay open on the table between them. Miles's face was pale, and he looked up at me with a mixture of anger and fear as I took a seat near the back. The door was closed, and the room went completely silent. Helena York did not waste any time. She introduced herself as the external legal counsel retained by Vance Consulting to address an urgent matter. She picked up my report and stated that the firm had received a detailed document outlining severe discrepancies in its compensation structure. She explained that she had spent the last hour reviewing the data and that the findings were deeply troubling. Helena York was a tall woman, her hair styled in a sharp gray bob, and her eyes were a piercing blue behind thin, wire-rimmed glasses. She did not look at Miles. She kept her eyes on the documents. When she spoke, her voice had the practiced cadence of a seasoned litigator who had seen dozens of companies try to defend the indefensible. She laid out the numbers, pointing to my 43-page report on the overhead projector. She explained that if these records were submitted to the Federal Department of Labor or used as the basis for a class action lawsuit, Vance Consulting would face massive financial liability. She explained that the company was looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars in back pay, liquidated damages, legal fees, and severe damage to its reputation. Miles tried to interrupt, stating that they needed to find out who had compiled this unauthorized document. Helena looked at him coldly and said that the source of the report did not matter. What mattered was that the data was entirely accurate and had been pulled directly from their own payroll system. She told Miles that the company had a major legal crisis and that trying to find the author would not solve the problem. She recommended an immediate independent compensation audit of every employee in the company to identify and correct any unlawful pay disparities. Helena explained that the audit would require reviewing every salary against market benchmarks, job descriptions, and employee credentials. Any disparity that could not be justified by legitimate business factors would have to be corrected immediately. Miles complained about the cost, but Helena stopped him. She stated that the cost of correcting the salaries was a fraction of the cost of a federal lawsuit. She added that under the law, affected employees could claim up to 3 years of back pay, and the court could award double damages for willful violations. She pointed directly at the calculations in my report, noting that the evidence was too strong to dispute. She then addressed the issue of the owner's nephews. Helena stated that paying family members, significantly more than experienced staff, for the same work created a clear pattern of discrimination. She recommended that Jared and Troy's salaries be adjusted immediately to match their actual experience and positions. If they chose to resign rather than accept the lower pay, she said that would be their decision. Jared, who was sitting near the front, looked completely stunned. Miles looked like he was about to have a medical emergency, his hands clenched tightly on the table. Helena demanded full access to all personnel records and payroll data by the end of the day. She announced that her team would begin interviewing employees immediately. After the meeting adjourned, the office was in complete chaos. Legal assistants from York and Partners moved into the main conference room, turning it into their command center. For the next week, every employee was called in for interviews. Rumors spread rapidly through the halls. It was reported that Troy Vance had walked out after being told his salary was being reduced, while Jared had stayed but was silent and embarrassed. Nora was standing near the water cooler later that afternoon, looking visibly relieved, and she whispered to me that she had never seen Miles look so shaken in all her years here. Brenda from Human Resources was already drafting the internal memo about the audit, and she nodded at me in the hallway with a look of quiet respect. It was clear that the balance of power had shifted completely. On Wednesday, I was called into the conference room to meet with Helena York. She was alone, reviewing my file. She looked up and thanked me for my professionalism, acknowledging that my analysis had saved the company from a much worse fate in court. She pulled out a spreadsheet and told me that the audit confirmed my salary was indeed $27,000 below market rate. She proposed adjusting my salary to $135,000 immediately, along with a back pay settlement of $111,000 for the past 3 years. She also offered a $24,000 retention bonus. The total settlement offer was $135,000. After taxes, it would be $95,000. Helena explained that this offer was contingent on me signing a settlement agreement and agreeing not to pursue external legal action. She also revealed that 24 other employees were receiving salary adjustments and back pay, costing the company a total of $3,400,000. Jared's salary was being reduced to $82,000, and Troy's had been cut to $75,000 before he quit. I told Helena that I needed a few days to consider the offer, and she agreed. That weekend, Sarah and I sat down to review the settlement documents. The $95,000 after taxes was a life-changing sum of money. It was enough to fully fund Owen's college savings and pay off our remaining car loan. However, I knew that I could not stay at Vance Consulting. Even with the raise, the trust was completely gone, and Miles would always look at me as the person who forced his hand. Sarah agreed. She told me to take the settlement, collect the money, and use it as a stepping stone to find a job where my skills were actually appreciated. On Monday, I signed the settlement agreement. Within 48 hours, the $95,000 was deposited into my bank account. On Wednesday, I updated my resume and began applying for senior financial roles at other firms. By the following week, I had 3 interviews lined up, all of which went exceptionally well. I received an offer from Crown Financial for a senior financial analyst role with a base salary of $146,000, excellent benefits, and a clear path to management. I accepted the offer immediately. Sharon, the hiring partner, told me that they were looking for someone who could not only analyze the numbers, but also provide strategic leadership. The salary was a significant jump, but what pleased me most was the transparent compensation policy they shared with me during the second round of interviews. I spent my first few weeks learning the new software, but I quickly realized that their budgeting processes were far more efficient and professional than what I had dealt with for 15 years. Sharon was an excellent manager who checked in on me daily, ensuring I had everything I needed to succeed. The onboarding process was incredibly organized, and I spent my first week meeting with different team leaders to understand their financial challenges. Every conversation reinforced my decision to leave Vance Consulting behind, as the transparency here was a breath of fresh air. I hired a junior analyst named Abigail Bennett. I made sure to walk her through our salary structures on her first day. I explained that she should never hesitate to discuss her compensation and that our firm was committed to equal pay for equal work. It was a proud moment for me, knowing I was helping to foster the kind of workplace I had fought so hard to find. I walked into Miles's office on Friday afternoon and handed him my 2-week resignation letter. He looked tired and defeated. He read the letter, sighed, and told me that he was sorry for how things had ended. He admitted that he had built a compensation system that was both morally and legally indefensible, and that the audit had been a painful but necessary wake-up call. He promised to give me an outstanding reference, acknowledging that I was the best financial analyst he had ever employed. I thanked him for his words, but I reminded him that he should have paid me fairly from the beginning without needing a legal threat to do so. My final day at Vance Consulting was filled with emotion. My colleagues organized a small farewell lunch in the break room. Nora, Simon Gable, and several others came up to thank me privately. Simon was particularly emotional, explaining that his raise in back pay would allow him to afford medical treatment for his daughter and help his wife return to school. Knowing that my actions had changed the lives of 24 families was far more rewarding than the money in my own bank account. Even Jared came by my desk before I left, apologizing for the disparity and admitting that he had a lot to learn about earning his place. My transition to Crown Financial was seamless. My new boss, Sharon, welcomed me to a culture that valued equity and transparency. 3 months after my start, I received a message on my professional network from Julia Perez, a former marketing specialist at Vance Consulting. She told me that her salary adjustment and $78,000 in back pay had allowed her to escape an abusive living situation and secure her own apartment. It was another reminder of the profound impact that fair pay could have on a person's life. Over the next few years, my career flourished. I was promoted to Director of Finance at Crown Financial, earning a salary of $210,000 and managing a team of 12 professionals. When the Chief Executive Officer, Eleanor Dunlap, suggested hiring her daughter for a senior role at an inflated salary of $150,000, I was the one who stood up in the executive meeting. I presented the market analysis, showing that senior analysts made between $115,000 and $125,000. Eleanor Dunlap respected my stance, and her daughter was hired at the standard market rate. I ran into Miles Vance at a professional conference 2 years after leaving his firm. He told me that the company had maintained the annual pay equity reviews and that their compensation structure remained balanced. He thanked me again for forcing the change. I realized then that I felt no lingering anger or bitterness toward him. Standing up for myself had not only corrected a massive injustice at my old firm, but it had also propelled me into a successful and fulfilling career. By refusing to accept his ultimatum, I had changed the lives of dozens of people and built a better future for myself and my family.